At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law took the microphone, smiled for the cameras, and said I was just the woman who cleaned his house. People laughed, polite, cruel laughter that sliced through my chest like glass. I didn't defend myself. I stood there, holding the photo of my boy, pretending the world couldn't see my hands shaking. What they didn't know was that inside my purse lay an unopened DNA envelope and the truth that would burn everything she'd built to ashes. My name is Selma Thornton, and that day, I buried more than my son. I buried my silence. Savannah in June felt heavier than grief itself. The air clung to my skin, thick and wet, as if the whole city was holding its breath. I walked into the church with a bouquet of white lilies pressed against my chest, trying to ignore the flashes of cameras and the hushed voices that rippled like judgment through the pews. At the front, Vivian stood poised in black silk, her sunglasses reflecting the crowd like armor. She spoke into the microphone with a trembling voice that wasn't grief, it was performance. Ethan was my whole life, she said. His mother was just the woman who cleaned his house. A few polite laughs followed. My heart didn't break. It folded in on itself, like a photograph creased too many times. I didn't respond. My silence was the only dignity I had left. When the applause faded, I walked to the casket and set my flowers down. The scent of lilies mixed with bleach, an oddly familiar smell that pulled me back to the day Ethan was born, when I held him for the first time in a hospital that smelled exactly like this. I touched the glass over his photo, and for a moment, my reflection overlapped his. He looked calm. I did not. At the far corner, little Simon sat on the carpet, spinning a toy airplane in his small hands. His laughter rang clear and innocent, and yet something inside me twisted. The boy had nothing of Ethan in him, not his eyes, not his quiet smile. Something didn't fit. When the service ended, Vivian approached me. Even through her veil, I could see the steel in her eyes. "All financial matters are now under Hale Holdings, Mrs. Thornton," she said sweetly, her tone polished and final. "You can rest now." I looked at her, my voice low, steady. "Rest comes after truth. Vivian, not before." She smiled, a blade disguised as courtesy, and turned away. Outside, the sunlight hit the marble steps like fire. Reporters shouted questions, but I kept walking, past the cameras, past the pitying stares, until I reached my car parked under a dying oak. My hands trembled as I started the engine, not from fear, but from the weight of everything left unsaid. That night, back in my small house by the river, I opened the drawer of my writing desk. Inside was a sealed envelope, Ethan's handwriting on the front, the one he had mailed to me 2 weeks before the crash. I tore it open and found a labeled plastic pouch, a strand of Simon's hair taped to a lab form. Beneath it lay a folded sheet of paper with a string of numbers scrawled across the top, a bank account. And below that, in Ethan's rushed handwriting, for the real Thorntons. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. Ethan had known. He'd left me the truth and the means to protect it. The next morning, I called the lawyer handling Ethan's estate. He told me that, in the will, my son had written one cryptic line, "To the one who carries my bloodline." Vivian, of course, had already declared Simon the sole heir. The board and attorneys nodded along. No one questioned her. Money has a way of buying silence faster than grief ever could. I hung up without saying a word. The river outside my window glimmered gold under the setting sun. I took Ethan's photograph from the mantel, pressed it against my chest, and whispered, "If the truth is buried with you, my boy, I'll dig with my bare hands." The evening wind carried the scent of lilies through the open window. Somewhere out there, between the rustling oaks and the restless current. I felt the faint pulse of something I hadn't felt in years, resolve. And for the first time since the plane fell from the sky, I knew my grief had a direction. 3 weeks after the funeral, I packed up what little strength I had left and drove north with Liam and Rosie asleep in the back seat. Savannah faded behind us like an old photograph, warm, painful, impossible to look at too long. Charleston met us with the thick smell of salt and the low hum of waves hitting the docks. The little house I rented near the marsh creaked in the wind, its porch light flickering through the night like a heartbeat I couldn't quiet. The next morning, I walked into the Charleston Trust Bank clutching the small brass key Ethan had mailed me weeks before his death. The cool air smelled of paper and cedar polish. Behind the counter stood Mr. Whitaker, his hair silver, his voice a little shaky from age and recognition. He'd been my late husband's friend once, before life took us down different roads. When I told him my name, something in his expression softened. Without asking questions, he led me to a private room and placed a small safe deposit box on the table. Inside was a single envelope, thick and slightly yellowed, along with several official-looking documents. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter written in Ethan's unmistakable, hurried hand. Mom, I know you'll find this if things go wrong, if Vivian ever claims everything. Wait for the DNA results. You'll know who deserves it. The words blurred for a moment. My son had known something was coming, had written from the edge of danger, still trying to protect us. Beneath the letter lay an insurance contract. My stomach turned as I read the line naming the beneficiary. Not Vivian Hale Thornton, Martin Delacroix. I whispered the name, tasting its weight. I didn't know him yet, but I felt his shadow step quietly into my life. I pulled a small notebook from my purse and wrote the name down, pressing hard until the pen nearly tore the page. A small voice broke the silence. Grandma, why are you crying? Liam stood in the doorway, holding Rosie's hand. I wiped my cheeks and managed a smile. Because, I said softly, I can finally hear your daddy's voice again. That night, after the children were asleep, I sat under the old oak behind the house. The wind off the harbor carried the smell of salt and wet soil. I placed Ethan's letter inside a rusted tin box and buried it shallow beneath the tree roots. The earth was damp, clinging to my fingers. I whispered, I'll dig it up when it's time. It wasn't a grave. It was a promise. Before I left the bank, Mr. Whitaker had leaned close and spoken in a voice meant only for me. A man came asking about this box a week before you did, he said quietly. Said he was family. Name was Martin Delacroix. I felt the air leave my lungs. He'd been here, watching, waiting. And when I rechecked the insurance file, another line caught my eye, so small it could have been overlooked. Co-signer S. Thornton, my own initials. Ethan had added me as a secondary signer. That meant I had legal standing to guard the money, to guard what he left behind. Someone out there had killed my son and was still moving, still close. I dusted the dirt from my hands and looked toward the harbor lights. The tide was rising. The truth, I realized, was buried deep, but not beyond reach. Days slipped by with the rhythm of the waves. Mornings. I made pancakes for Liam and Rosie. Evenings. I sat at the kitchen table tracing names through my son's old notebooks, piecing together the life he'd hidden from me. Each name led me to another face, another corner of his world I never knew. The first was Carla, a nurse I remembered faintly from the hospital where I'd been treated years ago. She lived in a small duplex north of town. When she opened the door and saw me, her eyes filled instantly. Ethan was kind, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. He visited every week until he met her. The word her hung like poison in the air. Carla brought out an old photo, Ethan sitting on a porch swing, baby Liam in his lap, both of them squinting at the sun with the same gray eyes, the Thornton eyes. My chest ached as I ran my thumb across their faces. He had loved this child, quietly, secretly, from Carla's. I drove to Columbia to find Grace, Rosie's mother, a gentle, tired woman who taught second grade. Her apartment was lined with children's drawings and unpaid bills. When I told her who I was, she broke down. He said he was going to leave her, she whispered. He said he was done pretending. She handed me a folded letter Ethan had written but never sent. The ink had run from tears. He'd been planning to start over. The crash stole that chance. As Grace wiped her face, I noticed a folder half buried under lesson plans. It was Rosie's medical file from birth. I opened it without thinking, and my heart jolted. Blood type. Oh, Ethan's was O2. Later that night, back home, I checked the hospital's public record of Simon's file, blood type B+. I sat frozen for a long time, staring at the printout glowing on my phone screen. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a crack in the perfect story Vivian had built. Then came the final blow. Looking through Ethan's old calendar, I realized Simon's birthday fell 3 months earlier than Vivian had claimed she was pregnant. 3 months too soon. I turned toward the window. The ocean beyond Charleston looked dark and endless, its rhythm steady as my pulse. I picked up my phone, my hand trembling but my voice steady when the lab technician answered. "This is Selma Thornton," I said. "I'm ready to send the sample." The words hung in the room long after I ended the call. Outside, the tide hit the dock again and again, a heartbeat I couldn't quiet. For the first time since my son's death, I wasn't drowning in grief anymore. I was swimming towards something sharp, something true. September in Savannah carries a kind of heat that clings to the skin long after sunset. The air felt heavy as I walked across the manicured lawn of St. Augustine Academy, where the school was holding a memorial for Ethan. Parents whispered in sympathy. Students held white roses, and in the center of it all stood Vivian, smiling, graceful, immaculate. Her black dress shimmered under the afternoon sun as if grief itself had been tailored to fit her. I stayed near the back, half hidden beneath the shade of a magnolia tree. From a distance, the whole scene looked staged, like a charity gala disguised as mourning. When Simon spotted me, he broke into a run, his small shoes thudding across the grass. "Grandma," he called, his face bright and unguarded. Vivian's smile froze. She caught his arm mid-step. "Don't call her that in public," she hissed through her teeth, still smiling for the cameras. The words hit me harder than I expected, but I forced a small smile and crouched beside him. "Your jacket's buttons loose, sweetheart," I said softly. As I fastened it, I slipped one hand up, plucking a single strand of his light brown hair from the collar. The moment felt cruel and necessary all at once. That night, I wrapped the strand in one of Ethan's old handkerchiefs and sealed it inside a small envelope. When I walked to the mailbox at the corner, my hands shook so badly that the flap nearly tore. As the envelope slid into the slot, I whispered, "Forgive me, Simon. The truth will protect you too." On the drive home, guilt twisted into resolve. Through the open windows, I heard Liam and Rosie laughing on the porch, their laughter light and real, nothing like the performance I'd watched that day. I told myself again that this wasn't about revenge. It was about Ethan, about justice. Later that evening, the television flickered in the corner of the living room. Vivian appeared on screen, standing beside a tall man with gray-streaked hair and a suit cut too perfectly to be honest. Martin Delacroix. His hand rested on her shoulder as she announced, "Thornton Energy will merge with Hale Holdings by the end of the year." My heart went cold. Ethan had mentioned that name in his letter, the one he didn't trust. Now the face had flesh, and the danger had form. The following days brought silence that felt too deliberate. Then came the first warning, an anonymous email with no subject line, just 6 words. "You're being watched. Stop the test." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. 2 nights later, a black SUV parked across the street and didn't move. The next morning, Mrs. Harris, my neighbor, mentioned that a polite man had asked about me at the post office. The air around me grew tighter with every hour. Someone was trying to stop me before the truth surfaced. That night, when I switched on the local news, a familiar face filled the screen, Tomas Reyes, the aircraft technician who had once warned Ethan about mechanical irregularities. The headline beneath his photo read, "Technical analyst reported missing." My reflection stared back from the dark glass of the TV, pale, trembling, furious. "He tried to warn me," I whispered, "and now he's gone." The anger burned away the last of my fear. If they thought silence would bury this, they didn't know me at all. I made a vow right there, under the humming glow of that old television. I will find him. I will find them all. Rain drummed on the porch roof in steady, relentless sheets. Charleston always smelled like salt when it stormed, the air thick with electricity and memory. I was sweeping water from the steps when the mail carrier appeared, soaked and apologetic, holding a plain manila envelope with no return address. Inside were 2 printed screenshots of text messages. My stomach dropped as I read the names. Vivian. He's checking the plane himself tomorrow. D. Good. The insurance will trigger automatically. The words blurred, the ink bleeding under raindrops that fell from my hair. My knees gave way. I sat right there on the porch, the rain mixing with the tears I hadn't planned to shed. They didn't just lie about the child. I thought, they killed him. I whispered into the storm. They made him die for money. By evening, I was standing in the office lobby of Thornton Energy, clutching the damp papers. The receptionist led me to a back room where a gray-haired woman looked up from a cluttered desk. "I used to work for your son," she said softly. "He was good to us." When I showed her the messages, her eyes darted to the door. "Mrs. Thornton," she whispered. "A week before the crash, Ethan tried to cancel his flight, but Vivian insisted he go to Miami. Did he say why? He said someone wanted the contract signed in person." The puzzle pieces began to shift into place. It wasn't an accident, it was a setup. Before I left, I asked one more question. "Did Ethan ever mention Martin Delacroix?" The woman nodded, fear flickering in her eyes. "Yes." He was furious. Said Martin was moving insurance funds without authorization. Outside, the air smelled of oil and wet pavement. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking toward the parking lot when a man in a hat brushed past me. He didn't stop. He just murmured, "Stop digging. Mrs. Thornton, you're next." I spun around, but the sidewalk was empty. That night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop. A new email waited, no subject, just a small audio file attached. The sender's name read TR011. My breath caught. I pressed play. A man's voice came through, rushed and trembling, speaking in Spanish. I caught only fragments. Miami, fuel system, Delacroix. Then static swallowed the rest. I sat frozen, staring at the wavering sound bar. Tomas was alive and trying to reach me. The evening news confirmed my dread. Police in Miami had discovered a burned computer fragment in a landfill near Delacroix's mansion. The report ended with a single sentence. "Authorities are investigating possible foul play." I turned off the TV and lit the small oil lamp on the table. Its flame flickered over the chaos of papers spread before me, letters, receipts, photographs, each one pointing in the same direction. I opened Ethan's old journal, the one I could barely bring myself to touch. On the last page, he had scrawled a single line, "If anything happens, she'll be with him." I closed the book, my heartbeat steady for the first time in weeks. "Then I'll go to Miami," I whispered. The lamp's flame wavered in the draft, but it didn't go out. Neither would I. Miami glowed like a furnace at night. Music, money, and lies burning under its lights. I rented a small room near the harbor under a false name and took a cleaning job at the Ocean Bay Suites, where Martin Delacroix stayed. Room 1207. The same man who had stolen my son's life now shared that room with Vivian, through a cracked door. I heard them laughing. "Ethan was never supposed to be on that flight," Martin whispered. Vivian's tone was ice. He checked the plane himself. "Martin, it was perfect." My heart stopped. I recorded everything, but a guard caught me. The phone was taken, my job gone. When I returned, my door was broken, my papers missing. On the table, "Go home before you disappear like the others." Panic pushed me to the pier. Someone followed. I stumbled, nearly fell. Then a hand pulled me back. Tomas Reyes, alive. He handed me a USB. "The explosion wasn't an accident," he said. "It was triggered remotely from Delacroix's mansion." Fear hit like a wave, but I stood tall. "Then I'll drown holding the truth," I told him. That night, as the city shimmered in the water below me, I opened Ethan's note again. The truth is in the contracts, and in the child. I finally understood. One last piece was missing, and Martin had it. 2 weeks later, Miami drowned in rain. From a cafe across the street, I watched Martin's mansion disguised as a candy cellar. One evening, Vivian stepped onto the balcony. "She'll never find the video," she said. Martin replied, "It's in my office safe." A dog barked. I hid in the thorns, my hands bleeding as I whispered, "Truth always costs blood." I escaped with a short recording, enough to prove they plotted Ethan's death. That night, I broke into the mansion. Behind a painting, I found the safe. Inside, a USB. Ethan's face filled the screen. "If you're watching this, Mom, I didn't make it. Don't trust her. The truth is in the insurance file." The alarm screamed. I fled through the rain, clutching the drive to my chest. Back in my room, I placed it beside Simon's DNA envelope. "One proves he lived right," I whispered. "The other proves she lied." At sunrise, I boarded the train back to Savannah, with the truth in my hands. Savannah greeted me with silence, the kind that settles into your bones. The city felt older, heavier, like it had been holding its breath while I was gone. Rain tapped gently against the window as I stood by the mailbox, a single white envelope resting inside, stamped from Atlanta. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. In the kitchen. I sat at the table where Ethan once did his homework, my hands trembling as I tore the seal. The paper crackled softly. One sentence was printed in bold. "No biological kinship exists between Ethan Thornton and Simon Hale Thornton." The words hit harder than I'd prepared for. It was like losing Ethan all over again, first to death, now to deceit. My breath caught, the room blurred. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to hold myself together. Outside, the rain grew steadier, drumming on the porch roof. I placed the envelope beside Ethan's photograph like an offering. "You were right, my boy," I whispered. "She lied, but we'll finish what you started." That afternoon, a car pulled into my driveway. Vivian stepped out first, immaculate in black, followed by a slick-faced lawyer carrying a leather briefcase. She didn't knock, just walked in, smiling with the arrogance of someone who thought she'd already won. "You're mentally unfit, Selma," she said smoothly, placing a stack of papers on my table. "Hand over the documents and stop pretending you know anything." I reached for the envelope, laid it open between us. "You're right, Vivian," I said evenly. "I don't know everything, only enough to bury you." Her smirk faltered. The lawyer leaned forward, scanning the paper, and froze. I recognized him then, the same man who'd notarized Ethan's insurance contract, his face drained of color. I turned my laptop toward them and pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the kitchen, low but steady. "Don't trust her, it's Mom. If Simon doesn't have my eyes, it's because he was never mine." Vivian's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Her skin went pale beneath the soft light. "You used my son's death to buy your empire," I said quietly. "Now let's see if it survives the truth." She stumbled back as I picked up the phone and called the FBI. My voice didn't shake. I gave them everything: the USB, the flight data, the DNA report. When they left, taking the evidence with them, I stepped outside onto the porch. The rain had turned to mist, soft and endless. "Justice isn't loud, Ethan," I whispered to the gray sky. "It's patient." The storm eased, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel anger, only calm. I had kept my promise, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Justice had begun its slow crawl, and the courtroom would be where it finally stood. 2 months later, Savannah's courthouse overflowed with people. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing like lightning against the gray sky. Inside, every seat was filled. Vivian Hale Thornton sat beside Martin Delacroix at the defense table, their hands clasped tightly together, a picture of unity. But their eyes were stone. I walked in carrying 3 things: the DNA results, Ethan's letter, and the USB drive that held his final words. When the judge entered, the room fell into a heavy silence. Vivian stood first, her voice polished and bright. "My husband's mother is delusional," she declared. "She's trying to defame me for money." Her lawyer handed over fabricated documents, claiming I had manipulated video footage and falsified DNA results. Their lies slid easily off their tongues. I stayed silent until the judge asked me to speak. "I'm not here for money, Your Honor," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I'm here because my son deserves the truth." The FBI agent stepped forward and presented the findings. "The aircraft's black box confirms a remote detonation," he said. "The signal originated from a phone registered to Mr. Martin Delacroix." Murmurs filled the room. Vivian's jaw tightened. Martin's hand twitched on the table. Then the agent dimmed the lights and played the video from the USB. Ethan's face appeared on the courtroom screen, pale, tired, but resolute. "Mom," he said, his voice echoing off the walls. "If Simon doesn't have my eyes, it's because he was never mine." You could hear the air leave the room. Vivian's composure cracked. She pressed a hand to her chest, letting out a shaky sob. "That video's manipulated," she cried. The judge looked at her calmly. "Mrs. Hale Thornton, if your son Simon was truly Ethan's, would you consent to a court-ordered test?" For the first time, she couldn't speak. Silence stretched. Martin stood suddenly, his voice breaking into panic. "She said it would look like an accident. She planned it." The courtroom erupted. The judge slammed his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. In that single outburst, Martin Delacroix had buried them both. The verdict came swiftly. The court found Vivian Hale Thornton and Martin Delacroix guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Their assets, including the $60 million trust, were transferred to the co-signer of record, me. When the gavel struck for the final time, the bailiffs took them away. Vivian kept her eyes on the floor. Martin didn't fight. I stood as they passed me and said softly, "You buried my son for money. I buried you with truth." No one applauded. Justice doesn't need applause. It only needs air to breathe. Outside, rain swept through Savannah, washing the courthouse steps clean. I tilted my face toward the storm, the cold drops mingling with the warmth behind my eyes. Somewhere above the thunder, I could almost hear Ethan's voice, calm, certain, proud. A year later, Charleston woke with spring. The air was warm and alive again, carrying the scent of wet earth and magnolia. Behind my small house, sunlight spilled across a new garden I had built with my own hands, a patch of life I called the Garden of 3 Suns. 3 rays of light, 3 children who carried what remained of Ethan's heart, Liam, Rosie, and Simon. The world had quieted since the trial. The money, the $60 million that once symbolized greed and death, had been reshaped into something that breathed. I founded the Thornton Foundation, a scholarship for orphans and children abandoned by their families. A small portion went to improve Simon's school, a place where he was no longer a Hale, but simply a boy who loved science and sunflowers. Every morning, the children and I worked in the garden. I taught them how to plant, how to wait, how to listen to the soil. Each child chose a tree to care for, one symbol for what Ethan had taught me to protect. Liam planted an oak for strength, Rosie planted a rose for kindness, and Simon, smiling shyly, chose a sunflower for truth. The 3 of them laughed as they dug, dirt on their faces, sunlight on their hair. The sound filled the spaces grief had once occupied in me. One afternoon, Simon stopped beside me, his hands muddy and small. "Grandma?" he asked, looking toward the sky. "Will Daddy ever see the garden?" I knelt beside him, brushing a leaf from his cheek. "He already does, sweetheart," I said. "Every morning, when the sun rises." The breeze carried our laughter through the branches. Sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, landing gently on Simon's face. His eyes were green, not Ethan's gray-blue, but there was a softness in them, the same quiet strength my son once had. In that moment, I finally understood. Blood didn't define a family. Love did. Late that day. Simon came running toward me, clutching a drawing. "I made this," he said proudly. On the paper were 3 figures standing in the garden, Liam, Rosie, and a tall man with eyes like mine. "I had a dream," Simon continued. "A man with your eyes said, 'Thank you.'" I froze, the world tilting for a heartbeat. Then I smiled through the tears that came without warning. The wind stirred the trees, carrying the fragrance of roses and young oak leaves. Justice hadn't brought peace, it had brought purpose. Truth, once buried, grows stronger beneath the soil, just like my garden, just like love. As the sun sank behind the marshes, its last light touched the garden and the children playing among the flowers. 3 small suns in a world finally learning how to heal.